Hello and welcome to a Hearts of Iron 4 tutorial for beginners here in 2024, where today we're going to continue with part 2 and take a look at some of the political parts of this game. So continuing on from where we left off in part 1, if you're following along, this is exactly where we left the game when we last saved. If you're just here to watch, just watch. Great to have you back with us. Let me just make myself a bit smaller. There we go. So the political part of this game, the governmental decisions and so forth, may sound really boring, and I just say it's not that it's boring because it's not simulated to that great extent, but when it comes to doing things such as declaring war, that is a governmental decision. When it comes to things such as what are your laws with regards to recruiting the population to take part in the wars that you're going to be fighting, that is a governmental decision. When it comes part to what kind of advisors do you wish to hire, because each advisor comes with various strengths that will, help you achieve things that you're trying to do, that sort of thing is a governmental decision. And so we'll take a look at doing that in this game. But first, before we do, what we really need to address are some of these icons here. Now, these include the governmental decisions, but they also include here research. So that's what we're going to do. This little icon here that looks like a test tube full of green liquid, because that's what science is, right? Science is having test tubes with different coloured liquids in them all and have them all bubbling away in a lab. That's what science is. Now, different in this game. So we'll click on that. We've got these different research slots available to us. Now, because we'd actually started on the 1st of January, we spent 10 days moving units around. We've actually seen these values here increase, and that's because you can save up, if that's the word to use, up to 30 days of research. That's a little bit too complicated to get into in any great detail just now. Just understand that we didn't actually waste 11 or 10 or 11 days of research. Thank goodness, right? Because you don't want to waste research. Another thing to understand about research is it doesn't cost you money to do research. It doesn't take up manpower. It doesn't take up resources. It doesn't take up XP points or anything like that. So there is almost never a reason to not have all of these researches on the go at any one time. There are one or two minor exceptions to that rule overall, which is a more advanced style of playing the game. But for the purposes of getting down on the basics, keep all of these full. So we're going to start with the top one. Just click to open it up. And you see here you've got your various branches along the top. You've got infantry. You've got your support companies, which are to do with your infantry or your other type of battalion. So, for example, here we've got a field hospital. We've got military police. And what's already unlocked here is an engineer company, at least level 1, as well as the recon company. You can see along the top there you've got your various years. So if I wanted, even though we're still in 1936... there is nothing stopping me unlocking the engineer company from 1939. But because this technology is 3 years ahead of time, or in this case 2.97 years ahead of time, so 3 years, I'm going to be heavily penalized if I research that technology. And you can see there in red, the more time ahead it is, the bigger the time penalty. It's going to take me 637 days to research that piece of technology. Now, that's a huge penalty, because if we pick something that's not ahead of time, for example, the military police here, you see, ordinarily it would take 97 days to research. So the difference between 97 and 637 is massive. And the only difference between this and this over here, see there, same again for the military police, is not because it's more advanced in the sense that it takes longer to research because it's more advanced. It takes longer to research because we're trying to do it 3 years ahead of time. But if you think, well, hang on, how long really is 637 days? Well, it's slightly less than 2 years. So in other words, we could, if we really wanted, have this 1939 piece of technology available to us in 637 days, which would be just under 2 years. So you could have a piece of technology, in this case, a whole year ahead of time. The trade-off to sort of dissuade you from doing that is, of course, the entire research slot that would ordinarily be taken up for 97 days to unlock one of these is actually going to be taken up for 637 days. So that's obviously a huge... it's a huge expense, isn't it? And considering we only have 4 of these research slots, to basically write one of them off for the best part of 2 years is a very expensive thing to do, although it would get us, the engineer company, a whole year ahead of time. So if you were really trying to gun for a certain piece of technology and you were willing to write off one of your research slots for a long time, but in exchange, for example, let's take a look at this tank. We would end up with this tank, if we was to pursue this one, roughly a year ahead of time, if we were to start this now, or almost a year ahead of time. To have a bigger and better tank on the field a whole year before anybody else would be expecting it is obviously a good thing, but again, it comes at a huge cost. So support companies we've been on, again, military, police, you've got your maintenance companies, logistics, as well as signal companies. We'll go into a bit more detail what all of these things basically mean. But absolutely crucial to unlock always any stage of the game of these first 2. Thankfully, playing as Germany, they already are. Engineer company and recon company, basically your scouts. Take a look at armor. I know we just looked at this. Because we've got all our DLC turned off, we're just playing the vanilla version of the game. It's broken down very simple. You've got light, middle, heavy, and then if you scroll down, you've got your super heavy tank for the late stage of the war. At the very end, you've also got this modern tank, which is sort of a combination between medium and heavy. Again, there's no way that we can unlock this, because not least is it 9 years ahead of time, and it's going to take 2,390 days to unlock, even if we could. It's blocked because we need to unlock the tree ahead. Now, you don't need to unlock both, but you do need to unlock one or the other. So we need to either have the Tiger and the King Tiger unlocked in order to get there, or these 3 medium tanks. Of course, we could have both as well. So that's that. Here we've got artillery. This comes in 3 flavors. You've got your anti-air, which is on the left, or also known as your flak. You've got your anti-personnel artillery, or your regular high-explosive artillery, I guess you'd call it, in the middle. And on the right-hand side, you've got your anti-tank, or your artillery that's armor-piercing, designed to take tanks out. There is this sort of 4th leg that starts out 1940. This enables for rockets, which is obviously a type of artillery, I suppose. I'm somebody, I have to admit, that doesn't often make use of the rocket artillery. Again, it's a game where you can't really research everything every time you play because there are too many things to research, so you've kind of got to prioritize. But certainly rockets are available there, as, if you like, as an extension of your high explosive kind of stuff, because that's what it's really for, right? It's designed mostly to go anti-personnel. Coming across along the top, you've got your naval. And again, if you're playing like we are today on the vanilla game, the vanilla version of the game, this is basically unlocking new ships, and that's it. If you have some of the DLC that allows you to customize various things, such as ships, you'll actually be able to unlock specific parts of a ship, such as the sonar, different types of cannon and armor and that kind of thing. Next one along, I'll just go over the different types of ships really briefly. So from the top, we've got destroyers. Next along, we've got cruisers. You've got your light cruisers. And then secondly, you've got your heavier cruisers, which is basically a slightly bigger cruiser that's more heavily armored. You've got thicker steel plating, so that obviously costs more resources and more time to build. The next thing you've got here are your battle cruisers and then your battleships. What's the difference between a battle cruiser and a battleship, you ask? Well, I'm sure some of you are screaming at the answer at me already, but basically a battle cruiser is a lighter version of a battleship. Some people may refer to them as a pocket battleship. Basically, again, you get a battleship with the big guns, but you reduce the armor. It makes them cheaper and quicker to build. Also means they can go a bit faster through the water. And there is, in a nutshell, your battle cruiser. I'm sure there's a little bit more to it than that. Of course, you've got your battleships, which is the biggest, heaviest, most expensive ship that you can build that has a gun. By itself is very vulnerable to attack from other things, such as submarines. Obviously, battleships are very vulnerable too. So ideally, what you want to do is not send out a battleship by itself, but send out a battleship together with other ships. And these are known as a flotilla. A group of ships is known as a flotilla. And that's where your destroyers come into play. The destroyers act as screening vessels, which is basically a fancy way of saying they're basically the bait, and they form, if you like, a shield that surrounds your higher value ships that you would have in the middle, your battleships, your aircraft carriers. They're self-explanatory, as well as maybe your heavy cruisers. So they would be in the middle, and then you'd have this flotilla flanked by destroyers and your light cruisers. Your destroyers generally, of course, have got sonar equipment on board. They may have, well, yeah, this version of the game, but they basically look for subs as well as absorbing shots from other smaller ships. So again, the best way to play Navy is to have a combination of ships, so we'll look at that. And of course, towards the end here, we've got submarines. That's fairly self-explanatory. These guys kind of operate by themselves and are generally good for taking out enemy convoy. In fact, that's what they're best at by far. Although they can obviously be used to pursue enemy ships, although I wouldn't generally recommend it, because of course if destroyers go up against submarines, generally speaking the destroyer's going to win. And then on the very bottom rung you've got your transport ships. These are, transport isn't necessarily the right word I'd use, but when it comes to doing naval invasions, your Higgins type boats, that's what this is here. You just think of them more as landing craft. That's the best way to describe them. So that's there. Over here you've got your air menu, and these are basically split into three types of aircraft, broadly speaking, which is you've got your close air support, or the ability to go after enemy tanks, enemy troops, that kind of thing. You've then got your fighters, which is basically your planes that go out looking for and shooting down any other aircraft that the enemy may have. And then you've got your naval bomber column here, you know, planes that basically carry a torpedo on board and are looking for an enemy ship to attack with that torpedo. They also, certainly up until the 1944 variant, carry floats on the aircraft, which enable the planes to land on the water. And they're able to put a microphone down or a hydrophone or whatever it is, and they're able actually to listen out for ships or subs while they're floating on the water, as well as extend the amount of time they are able to stay away from base. And floating on the water like this basically improves your ability of detecting enemy ships, until of course later on when they're equipped with radar. Those are your smaller aircraft. We then come to the larger aircraft on the right-hand side, which includes your heavy fighters. So these will be your twin-engine fighters that, carried on board, the early version of air-to-air radar. So these were also more commonly known as night fighters. And of course, they are good fighters in their own right. And because they're bigger, they have a much longer range, as well as being better equipped at night. You've got tactical bombers, which is a bigger version. On the left here, you basically got your Stuka type aircraft, your smaller ones, obviously cheaper to build, more of them. Your larger ones, able to bag a better punch, but are, again, more expensive to produce, but again, do have a much longer range. Also have slightly better defensive measures because you can basically have 2 or 3 gunners on one of these aircraft, you know, for defense versus just the one on the Stuka type. And then on the very end there, you've got your strategic bombers, which I have to say you'll probably end up using the very least. They have the longest range, but by themselves can be pretty vulnerable, certainly later on in the game where the enemy is very good at going after aircraft at night. The only exception is, of course, if you completely dominate the skies, and in which case these things can roam around pretty unimpeded, kind of like the end of the war was for Germany. If it comes to using nuclear weapons in this game, which you can do, you can research and use nukes, you obviously require strategic bombers to deploy those. Further down here, as we get towards 1945 and beyond, you have the capability of unlocking jet engines and then researching aircraft to do with there, which includes, of course, the Me-262, which was not only the only jet aircraft to see service in World War II. The Germans used these, but they actually produced about 2,000 of them, which I think is absolutely insane. That isn't to say that they had the pilots to fly them or the fuel to fly them, but yeah, the jet fighter squadrons, you know, if you've got 2,000 jet fighters as a country these days, you're doing pretty well for yourself. And I'm going to guess that aside from America, probably not many, if any, countries do have 2,000 jet fighters. Perhaps someone can put us right on that as well. Last but not least, we've got the engineering panel here. So this is what you require to basically unlock to get your radios, which is hugely important in a modern conflict. And then further down, you've got radar as well. This includes fixed installations on the ground as well as radar that would be used within ships and so forth as well. And then on the right-hand side, we've got the mechanical computing, which not only increases the research speed. So if we take a look at that, research speed +3, research speed here +4, this one here is +5. But also unlocks the ability to help encrypt stuff as well as decrypt stuff. Really important to take away here is that these bonuses or these modifiers are cumulative. So don't think, oh, well, this one gives you a 3% advantage, then this one gives you a 4, and then this one gives you a 5. They actually stack together. So this one gives you 3, this one gives you 4, 3 and 4 make 7. So actually getting this one is a 7% advantage. Then this one over here gives you an additional 5. So 3, 4 and 5 actually bring that whole advantage to 12%. So don't think, oh, 5 is a small advantage over 4, it's not worth bothering with. They add together. All of the modifiers in this game are always cumulative. So wherever you see plus this many percent, plus this many percent, and another example is, for example, if we come here to support companies, trying to look for a good example. So field hospital, let's have a look there. What does it say? So take a look down there under the effect of this field hospital. Field hospital experience loss, that's an easy one, -10%. Okay, so in other words, troops are injured, you're going to lose 10% less experience. That's a good thing. Okay, come over here, less than 10%. Come over here, less than 10%. So what you really mean is less 10, less 20, less 30. So these are obviously effects that stack. And so we've been over that. On the left here, on the right, you've got your atomic stuff. So obviously this is required if you want to get to your atomic bomb. It takes a long time to research and you need the entire thing. If you only research the first thing, doesn't do anything. If you only research the second thing, doesn't do anything. You need all of these 3 things together to be able to start producing weapons. And then over here again, you've got more rocket-related things that improve the rockets that you will have researched and allow you basically to set up what is the equivalent of like the V2 style, you know, the rockets that the Germans used versus London. Last but not least, when it comes to research then, we have our industrial tab. And like many real-time strategy games where you start with a base and you're looking to build up and expand, Hearts of Iron 4 is no different in that respect. It's generally best to start improving your industry first so you can build more quickly, expand more quickly, and then later on deal with the military side of things. So while it may be tempting to think, right, well, I want a better tank, I want better artillery, I want better weapons and so on, I want a bigger ship, I suggest holding off on that, coming over to your industrial tab and starting with this. So that's exactly what we're going to do. So if you follow along, come over to your industry tab. You've got your production one here from 1936. Check that and click research. That's your first thing underway. Then we're going to select the second one down and we're going to pick something else. Now you may say, well, okay, I saw that you clicked on production, but why? And the answer is, well, first off, it unlocks the rest of the tree, so that's a big why. The second thing, if we hover over, and you see you can hover over almost anything in this game, gives you a tooltip. We're back to that old modifier again. In this case, our production efficiency cap is increased by 10% once this is unlocked. What is the production efficiency cap, you ask? It's something we'll have a look at in a bit. But just trust me when I say green is good, and if we get plus 10% in the green, that's plus 10% good. So get that one. The next thing, well, we've already asked for that one. The next one we want is this one over here on the construction group. Look at this. It's going to take us 162 days to complete this, but we're going to get an additional 10% construction, 10% factory repair speed. If you were following along and you're not exactly on the 11th of January, this time to research maybe a day or two either side. Don't worry about that. If you're following along what I do, just make sure that your date always stays within a day or two of where I am. So if you're on the 10th of January or you're on the 13th of January, you'll be okay. If you're on the 15th of March, then you'll probably need to restart. Okay, so construction 1, take a look at this. It's going to let us build things, construction speed plus 10%. So obviously that's good, right? We can build stuff 10% quickly. And if we see also we've got a factory repair speed plus 10%. So once the war kicks off and we start and get bombed, which we will, certainly by Britain and France to some extent until we deal with those countries, they're going to cause our buildings damage. And while our buildings are damaged, factory, for example, it will be unable to produce whatever it's producing, let's just say tanks, until we've fixed the factory. Now, all of that is somewhat taken care of automatically in the background, but the point is, until it is repaired, it won't work. And so it's to have things repaired 10% more quickly is obviously better than not. And again, unlocks the rest of the tree, including this one here on the right, which you can see improves resource gain efficiency by 10%. And you might say, well, hang on a minute, this sounds a bit fishy. How come just clicking research for 162 days is going to increase the amount of resources that you get? That just doesn't make sense. Well, it does if you think about it, because you've got bigger and newer construction technologies, which is a bigger drill. You know, you're going to dig down deeper into the hole, whatever it is, because you've got more powerful equipment. That's why you're then getting additional resources. So think of it as you've got better equipment at the coal pit or at the iron ore pit or at the oil rig or wherever it happens to be. You've got newer equipment, better stuff. They're going to get more stuff out the ground. So let's get that one. Construction 1, research, okay. Last 2. So we're done with this page for now. So now we're going to come over to the engineering page. And there are very few exceptions to opening a game such as this, whether you're playing any country. Over here, we've got the electronic mechanical engineering. Now look at this. Once we get this, the effect on all research is it will be 3% quicker. So everything that we see, so let's say, for example, the Tiger tank is going to take 1,380 days. We'll knock 3% off that time, and you're talking a quite significant saving. But of course, we'll be looking to expand the research speed by continuing down here, as well as, of course, getting the radio and then the radar. Hugely important in this game. We'll see why radar matters so much, as well as the obvious of detecting planes. So we've got that. We'll click research. And then last but not least is the only research tab that's ever really open to any debate. You know, different people have different flavors and depends on which sort of tactics. Personally, I like to come over to the infantry tab here and get the 1918 weapons research so that we can get this up to speed as quickly as possible. Of course, Germany was held back a little bit after losing World War I, and because of that, some of the treaty stipulations meant they were either unable to do certain things or had to scale right back. So to get their weapons beyond 1918 technology is obviously hugely important. You can see all the modifiers on there, far too many to go through, but I'm just going to go through the top two. Infantry defense plus 5%, infantry breakthrough plus 5%. Right? Makes sense. You give your infantry better tools and equipment to work with, they're going to be more effective when it comes to doing things on the ground. Think of it like, oh, they've got better binoculars to look through. The first aid kit is a little bit more up to scratch. You know, think of it like that kind of thing. So we'll get that researched. Okay. And that's it for research. Notice the icon for the research, that little green science thing has gone. The next thing we're going to look at is free civilian factories. Now, civilian factories, I think, deserves... do you know what? I'm going to save that for episode 3, because civilian factories is actually quite a big topic when done properly. So we'll save that. Next one, we've got military factories. So military factories are used to produce everything militarily, from tanks to rifles to support equipment, trucks, planes, you name it, they produce it. The only exception is this one here, your free dockyards, which are of course used for producing shipping. That's the only distinction made between these two. So let's go with free military factories. So we'll click on that. That opens our production menu here. And if we take a look over here, this is actually our production menu. So if I was to click on this, it's exactly the same thing. The only reason you say, well, why would you have a button there and over here? The answer is this always opens up my production menu, whereas this one up here, this notification only lights up when, hey, you've got free military factories. In other words, you've got a factory here sat doing nothing that could be producing guns for your war effort. That's basically what it's saying. So we'll click on it here. And if we take a look at the rifles that we're currently producing, or what it's called infantry equipment level 1, we have 10 factories working on that, and that's what is represented here where my mouse is. Now, as I move my mouse over, I can actually adjust the amount, but by default is 10, which I think is a pretty good number of factories to start with. If we take a look here, we can see that those 10 factories are using 20 units of steel. Now, economy, when it comes to resources, is something, again, we'll devote more closely on another episode, because, again, there's quite a bit to it, certainly when you factor in trade and so forth. So when you say, well, is this 20, what is this? Is this 20 kilos? Is it 20 tons? Is it per day, per week? You know, what is it? And the answer is, it's 20 units of steel, end of story. Okay, think of it, and if that's not a good enough answer for you, think of it like this. Our 10 factories, the whole time that they're running, day by day, let's say, are using 20 units of steel. If they're running for a whole week, they're using 20 units of steel per week. However you want to square that away in your mind. They're using 20 units of steel, which means in order for us to effectively supply this factory, we just need to have a mine somewhere that is getting 20 units or more of steel out the ground. And we'll take a look at, again, resources more closely. For now, I just want to show that producing these weapons uses 20 units of steel. If we come down here, support equipment, see we've got 2 factories producing support equipment, and they're using 4 units of steel and also 2 units of aluminium. And again, if you're ever unsure what these icons mean, just, hover the mouse over it, it'll tell you. If we come down here, the artillery, this is used, we've got 1 factory producing artillery. It's using 2 units of steel, also 1 unit of tungsten. Okay, so obviously it makes sense, right? Different things use different things. A truck obviously uses rubber, for the tires, say with the planes. Planes, primarily made of aluminium. So what we now need to do is assign our 3 military factories in order to produce some stuff. So what I'm going to do is give 1 more factory for support equipment and watch what happens when I do. So on the left here, we see our 2 factories working together are producing 1.36 pieces of support equipment per day at this moment in time. Now, these things are influenced by various other things, but how many factories you have working on them is probably the main one. So if I go from 2 to 3, and I can do that by clicking on this plus icon here, or I can literally click on the 3rd factory there, but let's just press 3. We now have 3 factories working on it instead of 2. Look at what it's done to all the stats. So again, I'll just drop back. We go from 1.36 per day to 1.88 per day. If you take a look on the right here, we go from using 2 bits of aluminium and 4 pieces of steel to 3 pieces of aluminium and 6 pieces of steel. Makes sense, right? 4 factories working on the same thing means we need more resources to use, but we also end up with more stuff. We also have this graph up here. We'll look at it in more detail at another time, but it's basically how good is a factory at doing the job you've asked it to do. And the answer is, depends how long it's been doing it, right? So if you get a whole new factory like we just have and have said, right, start producing this thing, it's going to take them quite long until everybody in that factory knows what they're doing. If a factory has been producing support equipment for 5 years, they're probably really good. Everybody really knows what they're doing. So the same one factory that's been working for 5 years doing the same thing is going to produce more at the end of the day than another factory that's only just started. That makes sense in real life and is simulated in this game using this graph at the top. They call it production efficiency. Next one down here, artillery. We're going to put 1 more factory producing that. So we currently only have 1. So I'm going to click on the plus here. So now we've got 2 factories. And again, you can see the differences it's made. Continuing to scroll down, you can see, if we take a look at the top here, by the way, so far we have 28 military factories in total, and we've got 22 of them producing, okay, 2 of which we just assigned. If I knock these back, you can see we've got 20, okay. So the 2 adjustments we've made, 1 to support equipment, 1 to the artillery. There is never not a reason to use all of your military factories. Like, why would you not use them all? Again, it doesn't cost money. You don't lose manpower. You don't lose resources. As long as you've got enough resources to cover what you're doing, use them. This game, you can't save up resources by not using them today so that you can use them tomorrow. Doesn't work like that. We'll take a look at that again more closely in a future episode. Scrolling down here, we've got 2 factories producing the Panzer II tanks. I'm going to crank that up to a 3rd factory as well, and that's giving me 5 more factories to work with. We've got 1 factory producing the fighters here. I believe the Messerschmitt 109. I'm just going to crank that up to 3, so click, and that's gives us just 3 factories left. Also, we've got 2 factories producing trucks. I'm going to knock that one up to a 3rd as well. Excuse me. And if you take a look now, we've got 8 pieces of rubber in deficit. That's up here where we've got this basically a tire and it says -8. And we can see here on the right hand side next to the resources, we're good for steel, aluminium and all that sort of stuff. But when it comes to rubber, we're really struggling. So in order to put that right, what you want to do is either reduce the number of factories that are producing things that require rubber, or we need to make a trade deal with a country that does rubber. Now, I'll go more detail into this in a future episode, but for now, what we're going to do is we're going to click on this tire up here. This opens up the trade screen, which is this one here. And we're going to do a deal with one of these countries in order to get more rubber. Now, again, I will go into this in more detail in a future episode, so if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe. Well, what I will say is, when we trade for rubber, we give something back in return, and we basically give the use of a factory back. And I realize that may be a little bit, and it is kind of a weird mechanic of this game. All I'm going to say is, do not trade with a country that you intend on attacking, because it will actually benefit them. You will literally make them strong. Whoever we trade with is beneficial. You know, trading is beneficial to both sides, right? So bear that in mind. So UK, probably somebody who we're going to be against at some point. British Malaya, is, part of the British Empire. Dutch East Indies, okay, is also a country, because we're going to be looking at attacking these over here as well. So I'm going to go with Siam. Do not trade with a country that has less than 8 pieces of rubber available, because for every one factory that we're going to trade, in return we get 8 pieces of rubber, as you see there. It's 8 per. So you don't want to trade with somebody that's only offering 6, because you still trade a whole factory away and you only get 6 pieces of rubber. So Siam really is the most suitable option here, I think, to trade with. And so if we say, okay, we're going to trade one factory or the use of a factory for 8 pieces of rubber, we're going to click OK. As soon as we unpause the game and allow the day to tick over, this deficit of 8 rubber is going to completely disappear, because we're actually going to be getting this additional 8 pieces of rubber, okay? So let's press escape. Let's come back to the military factories. We still have, where is it? We've still got 2 factories to go. It would be pointless, in my opinion now, asking our factories to produce any more aircraft here. Why? Because we will not have enough rubber. They will literally be trying to produce something that there's a shortage of rubber. It doesn't mean they won't be able to do it. It will just be much slower because there isn't as much stuff to go around. So we may as well produce something that we get something for. One thing I highly recommend producing in this game is anti-air. So if we press this option here to produce a new line, because we're not yet producing any anti-air artillery, this opens this menu. So let me show that again. So under our production menu, just press escape, come back to production here. All the different military things we're producing here are in green, which include air, and then everything in blue is navy, which is our dockyards. Again, those are the 2 separate military factories, if you like. On the left-hand side here is everything that we can build that is not either a tank or a plane. And you can see that's listed here. And what I want to start and produce is towed anti-aircraft artillery, or the Flak. Now you may say, well, what about towed artillery? Well, if you look up this menu, we're already producing the towed artillery right there. So again, click on the anti-air, and that's going to drop it into this list at the bottom. So I'm not entirely OCD, but I do like to keep things in some sort of order. So I'm actually going to click this menu bar here and drag it up, and then I'm going to, while I'm clicking, use the scroll wheel to scroll up to the top of the menu, and I'm just going to drop this down next to the other piece of artillery. So now we have one factory just there that's got underway on producing the anti-air stuff, and of course 27 out of 28, just one factory remains. What do we want? I'm good to go with one more piece of support equipment for now. So let's up that to 4 factories. There we go. 28 out of 28 factories. Everyone is on the way into producing something. So if I press escape now, you can see the military factory icon has disappeared. The last thing I want to do then is dockyards for this episode. So we'll click on the dockyard icon. That opens the same production menu, but again, it's telling us we've got 3 dockyards, and we're going to come down here to the lower half where all our ships. So everything listed here in blue are ships that are currently being produced in our dockyards. Now, one of the weird things about this game, and there are a few, is you can have up to 10 dockyards, literally up to 10, working on a single ship. So here we currently have 1 dockyard producing this line of subs, and it says number 2 there, because what they're going to do is they're going to produce this 1 submarine. You can see they've almost finished it. It's like 3/4 done. Once they've produced that sub, they're going to start again with a 2nd sub, and this 1 dockyard is going to work on it until that sub is complete, and then that production line is finished. Personally, I think that's an inefficient way to produce ships, because I think it makes more sense to have many dockyards working on a single ship, and they'll be able to produce it much more quickly, rather than having many dockyards each doing their own thing and it taking a lot longer to produce. There is no benefit at all I can see to having many dockyards each doing their own thing. What I do not want to do is cancel the ships that they're already producing, because of course many of them are like halfway or more complete. So what I'm going to do is drop this down to number 1. And so now what's going to happen is the dockyard is going to complete this sub, and once it's done, the dockyard is going to become available to produce something else. Well, if we look here under dockyards, we currently have 10 dockyards in total, and we're using 9 of them. Yeah, and that's because there's 9 things under construction, each of them with a solitary dockyard. So what I'm going to do is put the 2nd dockyard to work on this sub here. So if we click there, now look at this. Dockyard's 10 out of 10, and the icons disappeared. So if I was to unpause the game now, and if by the way you're following along, make sure you do what I'm doing here. I will literally tell you if not to follow along. So with 2 dockyards producing this sub, look when they think it's going to be complete. The 25th of January 1936. It's currently the 11th of January. Now if I reduce back to just the solitary dockyard, it's now going to complete on the 8th of February. We also get that notification once again to say, hey, you've got 3 dockyards, because we've just taken one off the job. So 8th of February, 2 dockyards, 25th of January. Makes sense, right? More people working on the thing, it's done twice as quick. Now, although we don't have any spare dockyards, but just pretend that we did. Imagine instead of 2 dockyards, I had 3. Look at the date, 21st of January. Now, if I had all 10 dockyards, now look at the date, the 14th of January. Well, it's currently the 11th of January. So if I had 10 dockyards, this boat would be ready to go in just 3 days. As it happens, with just 2 dockyards, it's more like 2 weeks. Once this sub finishes, though, in 2 weeks' time or thereabouts on the 25th of January, those 2 dockyards that were working on it are going to become available. So what I'm going to do is next to this next sub, I'm going to knock it down. Just want the 1. And I'm going to scroll to the end. And this one, just the 1. So set this sub as well, just to the 1. So take a look at the date. This one's going to finish first on the 25th of Jan. Makes sense because we've got the most dockyards working on it. But once they complete and those dockyards become available, they're going to take their priority from the top of the list down. In other words, they're going to try and work for this one. So what I'm going to say is I want 10 yards working on this. I want 10 yards on this one, and I want 10 yards on this one. You can see, though, that although we've asked for 10 dockyards to work on it, there is only 1 dockyard available, because, again, we're using them all. So when this sub here finishes, those 2 dockyards become available. They're going to slide down, and you will end up having 3 dockyards working on this sub. That's obviously going to be much quicker than 1. When they're finished, they're going to slide down. We're going to have 4 dockyards working on this, and so on, and then 5 dockyards working on this. Now, once all of that's done, we could do the same thing again down here, but I'm just going to leave it to prove the point. The notification is going to come. We're going to hear that noise, and it's basically going to say you've got dockyards available. And when that happens, we'll take another look at this production menu. So that's right there. Last but not least then for this episode, we're going to take a look here at the national focus, which is a bit like one of the governmental decisions. And this is a tree on everything that you can do with your country. So depending on what country you play, your whatever they call a focus tree is going to look very different. If you have DLC, your focus tree may look different. So you can zoom in and out on this with your scroll wheel. You can click and drag to zoom around. In my opinion, the best way to play, certainly if you're new, is to get the Rhineland unlocked first. So what the Rhineland is, let's just show real quick, is after World War One, the Treaty of Versailles prevented German troops from being able to enter this area. I actually believe it actually covered the area down here as well, along the coast of France. But regardless, they were not allowed to put their own military within the borders of Germany towards the western end. And you had French troops occupying this particular area. There was a whole segment of history to do with that, and unfair treatment and this and that, and he said, she said kind of stuff that I'm sure if you're interested in, you'll take a look at. But as suffice to say, as far as this game goes, if I try and put this guy in there, I can't. It's almost treated like it's another country. And so in order to be able to put my troops in there, I need to unlock this here, the Rhineland. You know, it's basically, think of this as a government decision, a government policy that you're trying to push through to enact some kind of change. And I realise some will say, well, hang on a minute, I'm playing as a dictator. I should be able to make any number of changes as and when I like. I hear you, but this game limits the amount of changes that you can make. And the way it does that is by basically making these decisions last 70 days at a time. Some of them sometimes last 35 days. Naval rearmament, there's a good example of one. So it would take us 35 days to do that. If we do that, we actually end up with a couple more Navy yards. Actually 3, it would appear like 2 in Holston and another one in Weser-Ems. But for now, we're going to go with Rhineland. It's going to take 70 days to do. Now, the most obvious change is going to be we can put troops along the border, which is obviously hugely important, especially if we're thinking about war. But we also look at this, gain political power as well as some army experience. We also cause a little bit of world tension. Why would you get political power for doing a decision like this? And the answer is simple, because if you're running a country, whichever country that happens to be, and you make a decision that is very popular amongst the people, they're going to laud praise onto you that then will enable you or bolster you in doing more and more things. And so the people are going to be happy that you've said, look, we're not doing these shenanigans anymore. This is our country. We're going to put our own troops within our own country, and that's it. They obviously like that. And so political power, Rhineland, is a very good first step, certainly if you're playing as Germany in one of your first games. So we'll get the Rhineland in. We're going to click OK. And that is now underway. And with it is the end of episode 2. In the next episode, we're going to take a look at these civilian factories. And then we'll also take a look at something a little bit more exciting, perhaps managing the Air Force. All right, until then, that's going to be it. Remember to like the video if you haven't already. Come away, hit save game. And this time we're going to call it, I'm just going to call it Germany Tut Part 2. We all know what we're talking about. I look forward to seeing you for Part 3. Ta-ra.